Have you ever held a memory in your hands, something you thought you knew inside and out, only to realize years later that you were only seeing half the picture? It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Like finding a hidden room in a house you've lived in your whole life. I suppose that's what this whole story is about, the hidden rooms in the people we love, and the quiet truths that wait for us in the most unexpected places. I sat by the window of the house I'd helped my son and daughter-in-law purchase, watching raindrops race down the glass. At 67, I'd grown accustomed to the gentle rhythm of my days preparing breakfast for David, before he left for work, tending to the small garden out back, occasionally retreating to my little studio upstairs where I'd paint. I'd been a high school art teacher before retirement, before my world narrowed to this house and the people in it. My $40,000 down payment had secured this beautiful colonial-style home for David and Stephanie 5 years ago. Sometimes I caught myself admiring the crown molding or the hardwood floors, feeling a quiet pride in having helped make this possible. David always thanked me for my contribution, his eyes warm with genuine gratitude. Stephanie's thanks came less frequently, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. The sound of Stephanie's heels clicking against the hardwood floors pulled me from my thoughts. She was dressed impeccably as always, designer dress, not a hair out of place, makeup perfect. At 38, she cultivated an image of domestic perfection that extended to her social media accounts where she showcased their ideal life, elaborate dinner parties, vacation photos, designer outfits. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one who sees the shadows in our perfect family portrait. The tightness around David's eyes when Stephanie complains about finances. The way his shoulders slump slightly when she mentions rising household costs while I'm within earshot. The $800 I contribute monthly from my modest pension feels increasingly inadequate in Stephanie's ledger of family expenses. David enters the kitchen, kisses my cheek, and pours himself coffee. At 45, my son has his father's height, and my artistic sensitivity, though he channeled it into financial management rather than art. He wears responsibility like a second skin, always carrying the weight of others' expectations. Today, something seems off. His complexion is slightly gray, and he rubs his left shoulder absently. Sometimes I wonder if we ever truly see the people closest to us, or if we only see what we want to see. That night I learned just how blind I'd been. The telephone's shrill ring pierced the quiet darkness at exactly 3:17 a.m. I remember the red numbers on my alarm clock glaring at me as I fumbled for the receiver. David's voice, usually so full of life and warmth, was a frightened whisper stretched thin with panic. "Mom," he gasped, and I could hear the struggle for each breath. "Something's wrong. My chest. I can't." And just like that, the line went dead. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. I don't remember grabbing my keys or throwing my coat on over my nightgown. The next thing I knew, I was standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital emergency room, and a doctor with tired eyes was telling me that my son, my vibrant 45-year-old boy, was gone. A massive heart attack, he said. The words were clinical, detached, like he was describing a mechanical failure, not the shattering of my entire world. There are moments in life when time stops. When you hear your child is gone, it's as if a part of your soul leaves this world too. Standing beside me was my daughter-in-law, Stephanie. Her face was a perfect portrait of shock, her eyes wide, her hand covering her mouth. We'd never been what you'd call close, her and I. David was always the gentle bridge between our two very different shores. But as I stood there drowning in a sea of grief, I saw something flicker in her expression just for a second. It was a look I couldn't quite place, hidden behind the mask of sorrow. Was it relief? No, I told myself. My mind was playing tricks on me. Grief does that, you know. It makes you see shadows where there's only light. "What happens now?" I whispered to no one in particular, the words feeling foreign in my own mouth. David couldn't be gone. He was supposed to outlive me. That's the natural order of things, isn't it? Stephanie seemed to pull herself together with a visible effort, her shoulders straightening. "Now we deal with reality, Eleanor," she said, and the coldness in her tone was like a splash of icy water. "David's gone, and there are decisions to be made. The chasm between us, the one David had always so lovingly bridged, was suddenly miles wide, and I was standing on the edge all alone. I reached for her hand, a mother's instinct to offer comfort to pull us together. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice trembling. "We'll get through this together." She pulled her hand away as if my touch had burned her. "We'll see about that," she murmured, turning her gaze toward the sterile hallway. I should have heard the warning in those words loud and clear as a church bell on a Sunday morning. but my heart was too broken to listen. I just told myself that people grieve differently. Some of us fall apart and some of us build walls. I thought she was just building her walls. I had no idea then that I was the one she was trying to wall out. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. Silence is strength dressed in satin. In the days that followed, I wrapped myself in quiet dignity, keeping my pain private. I'd learned long ago that tears don't change outcomes. They only reveal vulnerabilities that others might exploit. There's a strange, numbing fog that descends when you have to plan a funeral for your own child. The world keeps moving, cars drive by, people laugh on the street, but you're trapped in a slow-motion nightmare of casket choices and flower arrangements. The next 3 days were a blur. I offered to help with the expenses, of course. David was my only child, my everything. I've got it. Stephanie insisted, her voice clipped and efficient. I'm his wife. I know what he would have wanted. It seemed fair enough, so I stepped back. I let her handle the logistics while I tried to handle the impossible task of summing up my son's beautiful life in a few short paragraphs for his eulogy. I called relatives, my voice cracking with each conversation, and tried my best to hold the pieces of my shattered heart together. At 67, I thought I knew what loss felt like. I'd buried my own parents and my dear husband 10 years prior. But this losing a child is a grief of a different magnitude. It's an amputation of the soul. Stephanie orchestrated a beautiful farewell. The church was filled with elegant white lilies. David's favorite hymns echoed through the stained glass windows, and the reception she hosted afterward was flawless. She played the part of the grieving widow, perfectly accepting hugs and dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But I could see the cracks in her performance. I heard her making comments about moving forward and starting new chapters that felt jarringly premature. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to listen not just to what people say, but to the spaces between their words, the unspoken intentions that hang in the air like invisible smoke. I was standing in the receiving line, my hand aching from being squeezed by well-meaning friends, when I overheard something that made the blood in my veins run cold. Stephanie was tucked away behind a large floral arrangement, speaking in a low, conspiratorial tone to her sister. "The life insurance alone will cover the mortgage for 2 years," she was saying. Her sister's voice was even quieter. "What about Eleanor? Where will she go?" Stephanie let out a short, brittle laugh. "That's not my problem anymore. She's a grown woman. She can figure it out. Extra expenses. Was that what I was, an extra expense? A problem to be figured out?" The words hit me harder than any physical blow. 2 years I had lived in that house. I'd sold my own home to give them the $40,000 down payment. A fact David had always been so grateful for. I thought I was contributing, helping build their future. But in Stephanie's eyes, I was just a line item in her budget, one she was eager to cross out. Just then she appeared at my side. Her public smile pasted back on her face. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "could you give me a hand in the kitchen? There are a few things we should discuss." I followed her like a lamb, nodding numbly at the remaining mourners. My own sister gave me a final worried hug before she had to leave for her flight back to Phoenix. In the kitchen, Stephanie closed the door, and the warmth instantly vanished from her expression. "I'm going to be direct," she said, her voice all business. "This house was in David's name, which means it's legally mine now. I need time and space to process my grief without complications." "Complications?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "You living here," she stated, not unkindly, but with a finality that was devastating. "It's not working for me anymore, Eleanor. I need my privacy." I stared at her, trying to find the woman my son had loved, the woman who had cried with joy when he slipped that ring on her finger. She was gone. "Stephanie, I understand," I pleaded, "but surely we can figure something out. Just give me a little time." She held up a hand, stopping my words. "No, my decision is made. I'll give you until tomorrow evening to pack your things. That should be more than enough time." "Where am I supposed to go?" The question hung in the air between us. She just shrugged. A small, indifferent gesture that broke my heart all over again. "You're resourceful, Eleanor. You'll figure something out." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. "David would be horrified to hear you talking like this," I managed to say. Her eyes met mine, and they were as cold and empty as a winter sky. "David's dead," she said, the words flat and final. "And the sooner you accept that, the better off we'll both be." It's a humbling experience to pack up 67 years of your life into 4 suitcases and 2 cardboard boxes. Each item I touched: a faded photograph, my husband's old watch, a silly ceramic bird my David made for me in kindergarten, was a memory. And each memory was a fresh wave of grief. As I carefully folded my sweaters and wrapped my few treasures in newspaper, I kept listening, hoping to hear Stephanie's footsteps on the stairs. I prayed she would come in and apologize, tell me she'd been overwhelmed with grief and hadn't meant it. Of course I could stay. We were family after all. But she never came. Instead, at precisely 6:00 the next evening, she appeared in the doorway of my now barren room, her arms crossed over her chest. "Time's up, Eleanor." I zipped the last bag closed, my hands trembling slightly, and took one final look around the room that had been my little sanctuary. It was just a guest room again, impersonal and empty. "I just need a few more minutes to get everything down to the car," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "I'll help you," she said. It wasn't an offer of kindness, it was an order. She wanted me out, and she was going to make sure it happened quickly. We made the trips down to my car in a thick, suffocating silence. As I loaded the last box into the trunk, I turned to her, determined to make one last appeal to her humanity. "Stephanie," I began softly, "I know I must have done something to make you feel this way. I wish you would tell me what it was so I could try to understand." Her expression didn't change. There was no flicker of remorse, no hint of compassion. "You didn't do anything wrong, Eleanor," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You just exist in my space, in my life, in my way. David felt sorry for you, but I don't. The honesty of it was more brutal than any lie. It was cleaner in a way. There were no more pretenses between us. I said the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I got into my car and rolled down the window. A final practical thought surfaced through the pain. Will there be a formal reading of David's will? I just assumed he might have left a small memento. She looked genuinely bewildered by the question. Why would he leave you anything? You're not his wife. It's not like you ever contributed financially to our household. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. My $40,000 that had made this very house possible seemed to have vanished from her memory. "Of course," I said, a weary smile touching my lips. Silly of me to assume. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I drove toward the only place I could think of, a Hampton Inn on the highway, a place for travelers with no real destination. As I sat on the edge of the stiff polyester bedspread in a room that smelled of disinfectant and loneliness, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I saw a woman I barely recognized. A widow, a motherless child, and now a homeless woman. Room 217, $89 a night plus tax. That's the price of starting over. I calculated my meager savings. I had enough for about 2 months if I was careful. After that, the question hung in the air unanswered. But as the minutes ticked by in that sterile, quiet room, something else began to stir deep inside me. It wasn't just despair. It was something sharper, something that felt almost like a spark of defiance. Stephanie thought she had won. She thought she had neatly swept me out of her life like a pile of dust. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that my David had always been a much, much better son than she had ever been a wife. And our story wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Have you ever found yourself in a place so low you weren't sure which way was up? That was me in that little hotel room. For 2 weeks, I lived in a strange limbo, my life packed into suitcases at the foot of the bed. I spent my days scrolling through online listings for tiny one-bedroom apartments and senior living communities, my stomach tightening each time I looked at my dwindling savings account. I'd always been financially independent. I'd sold my own small pottery shop when I retired, but now the future stretched before me like an uncharted wilderness. The silence was the hardest part. I was so used to the familiar sounds of a home, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of the television, David's cheerful whistle as he came in from work. Now there was only the rattle of the air conditioner and the muffled sounds of strangers in the hallway. I found myself talking aloud sometimes, just to hear a human voice. "David, what am I supposed to do now?" I'd ask the empty room, half expecting my son's reassuring answer. The silence that followed was another small death. At night, I would lie awake replaying moments from our life together, teaching David to ride a bike, helping him with his college applications, the proud gleam in his eyes when he got his first job. I'd examine each memory like a jeweler inspecting a precious stone, searching for flaws or hidden meanings I might have missed. Had I been blind to the tensions in his marriage? Had Stephanie always resented my presence? Had David felt trapped between his love for me and his loyalty to his wife? The more I thought about it, the more I remembered small moments that should have been warning signs. The way Stephanie's smile would tighten when David suggested I join them for dinner out. The conversations that would abruptly stop when I entered a room. The gradual disappearance of family photos that included me from the living room walls. Just as a quiet desperation began to set in, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Fairfield, a kind professional voice asked, "This is James Morrison. I was your son David's attorney." I remembered him instantly, a gentlemanly man with kind eyes whom I'd met briefly when David and Stephanie closed on their house. "Yes, Mr. Morrison," I said, sitting up a little straighter against the hotel pillows. "I'm calling to let you know that the probate process is complete. There will be a formal reading of David's will at my office next Tuesday at 2:00. Your presence is required." My presence was required. The words echoed in my head. "I'm sorry," I said, confused. "I think there might be a mistake." My daughter-in-law Stephanie seemed quite certain. He cut me off gently. "Mrs. Fairfield, I can only tell you what is written in your son's will, and it very specifically names you as a beneficiary. I'll see you on Tuesday." After we hung up, I just stared at my phone. David had left me something. It couldn't be much, I reasoned. Maybe his father's old watch, which I'd given him on his 30th birthday, or perhaps the family photo albums he cherished. Whatever it was a message from my son, a final acknowledgement of our bond. Stephanie wouldn't be pleased, but it was a small comfort, a little light in the darkness. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the lawyer's office a few minutes early. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and watched as Stephanie pulled up in a sleek silver BMW I'd never seen before. She stepped out wearing a chic black dress that probably cost more than my entire monthly budget. She wasn't alone. A man in an expensive-looking suit, who I recognized as her brother Marcus, was with her. Marcus had always been Stephanie's staunchest ally, a successful corporate attorney who viewed the world as a collection of assets to be acquired and liabilities to be managed. I suspected I fell squarely into the latter category in his ledger. When I walked into the elegant waiting room, Stephanie's face went from composed to thunderous in a heartbeat. "What is she doing here?" she demanded of the young receptionist, not even bothering to lower her voice. The receptionist, bless her heart, didn't flinch. "Mrs. Fairfield is here for the will reading, ma'am." "Which Mrs. Fairfield?" Stephanie snapped. "Both of you, apparently," the receptionist replied coolly. Marcus leaned in and whispered something to his sister, and she gave a curt nod before taking a seat as far away from me as possible. The message was clear. We were no longer family. We were adversaries. Mr. Morrison called us in precisely at 2:00. His office was warm and inviting, lined with books from floor to ceiling. He settled behind his large mahogany desk and looked at us over the top of his spectacles. "Ladies, gentlemen," he began, his voice calm and steady. "I know this is a difficult time for everyone." David was very clear and specific about his final wishes. "I will read the will in its entirety." Stephanie leaned forward in her chair, a look of keen anticipation on her face. I simply folded my hands in my lap and waited, my heart fluttering like a trapped bird. The first part of the will went exactly as I expected. Stephanie, as his wife, inherited the house, the cars, David's substantial retirement accounts, and his life insurance policy. With each item Mr. Morrison read, she nodded, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She even glanced over at me once, a look of pure triumph in her eyes. Then Mr. Morrison's tone shifted slightly. He paused and cleared his throat. "There is, however," he said, looking directly at me, "one final provision that David added to his will just 3 months ago." The air in the room suddenly felt thick and heavy. Stephanie stopped nodding. Her brother put down his pen. I held my breath. Mr. Morrison continued reading from the document. "To my mother, Eleanor Fairfield," he read, and my eyes filled with tears just hearing my son's words, who provided the $40,000 down payment for our home and has never once asked for it to be repaid. "I leave the entire contents of safety deposit box number 3537 at First National Bank, along with all associated documentation and account information contained therein." "What safety deposit box?" Stephanie's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet room. David never said anything about a safety deposit box. Mr. Morrison looked up. "Apparently it was something he maintained privately, ma'am. He was very specific that only his mother was to have access." I was just as stunned as she was. A private safety deposit box. What on earth could my David have put in there that he wanted only me to see? What's in it? Her brother Marcus asked, his legal mind worrying at this unexpected development like a dog with a bone. I have no knowledge of the contents, Mr. Morrison replied honestly. David simply provided the key and the instructions that Mrs. Fairfield here should have sole and complete access upon his passing. Stephanie's face was flushed with anger. This is absurd, she declared. If there's anything of value in that box, it belongs to the estate. We'll contest this. Mr. Morrison remained unruffled. You are certainly within your rights to try, he said mildly. However, the provision is ironclad. David was of sound mind and body when he made this addition. I witnessed his signature myself. A question popped into my head. Mr. Morrison, I asked quietly, when exactly did he add this? He checked his notes. 3 months ago, February 15th to be exact. February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day. I remembered that night so clearly. We'd had a family dinner, and David had been so quiet, so withdrawn. Stephanie had spent most of the meal complaining about something trivial, and I'd felt a strange sadness coming from my son. Now I understood he was making plans. He was protecting me. This is a waste of time, Stephanie snapped, pushing her chair back abruptly. Marcus, let's go. We'll file the challenge first thing in the morning. Actually, Mr. Morrison said, holding up one more document before you go. David left a sealed envelope for his mother with specific instructions. He handed a thick, cream-colored envelope across the desk to me. These are the bank documents and his personal key. The bank will need to process the paperwork, which usually takes a few business days, but he wanted you to have this immediately. Stephanie's eyes were locked on that envelope as if it held the secrets to the universe. I'm coming with you to the bank, she stated. Mr. Morrison shook his head. I'm afraid that's not possible. Bank policy is very strict. Access is restricted to Mrs. Eleanor Fairfield only. As we walked out into the parking lot, she cornered me by my car, her voice suddenly sweet and pleading. Eleanor, let's be reasonable. Whatever is in that box, we should share it. David would have wanted his wife to benefit too. For the first time since my son died, a real smile touched my lips. That's funny, Stephanie, I said, my voice calm and clear. Just a few minutes ago, you were so sure he wouldn't have left me a single thing. Why the sudden change of heart? Her mask slipped, revealing the raw greed beneath. Don't forget Eleanor, she hissed. You're living in a motel. You need my goodwill far more than I need yours. I paused with my hand on the car door and looked her straight in the eye. Actually, Stephanie, I said softly, I don't think I need anything from you ever again. Have you ever felt that little flutter of hope right before you open a long-awaited letter or a special gift? That's how I felt for 3 whole days, 3 long business days while the bank processed the paperwork. I spent the time in a daze, my mind racing with possibilities. What could my David have possibly left for me? I didn't dare hope for anything substantial. Perhaps some family heirlooms, maybe a letter explaining his marriage troubles, or possibly even a small insurance policy he'd taken out just for me. The uncertainty was both excruciating and exhilarating. For the first time since his death, I felt something other than grief. I felt curiosity, anticipation, even a strange sense of connection to my son, as if he were orchestrating events from beyond the grave. During those 3 days, Stephanie called me 4 times, her approach shifting with each call. First, she was conciliatory, suggesting we put aside our differences. Then she tried intimidation, reminding me that she had legal resources that I couldn't hope to match. Next came veiled threats about finding irregularities in the way I'd handled my finances while living with them. Finally, she attempted bribery, offering to help me get settled in a nice apartment if I agreed to share whatever was in the box. I declined each overture with quiet dignity, my resolve strengthening with each passing day. David had wanted me and only me to see the contents of that box. I would honor his wishes. Finally, the call came. Everything was in order. I could come to the bank. The bank manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Peterson, was waiting for me. She expressed her condolences for my loss and then personally escorted me into the vault. The air was cool and still, and the silence was broken only by the quiet hum of the security systems. Box 3537 is one of our larger units, she explained as she led me to a wall of gleaming metal doors. Your son rented it about 5 years ago. He was a very regular visitor. 5 years. This wasn't a recent decision. This was a plan David had been carefully tending to for years. My heart ached with a mixture of sorrow and a profound swelling love for my thoughtful boy. Mrs. Peterson used her master key, and I inserted the small brass key David had left for me. With a soft click, the lock released, and she slid out a heavy metal box about the size of a briefcase. "Take all the time you need, Mrs. Fairfield," she said, showing me into a small private viewing room. "I'll be right at my desk if you need anything." Alone in that quiet room, I took a deep breath and lifted the lid. The very first thing I saw resting on top of a stack of papers was a letter addressed to me in David's familiar, strong handwriting. My hands trembled as I carefully unfolded it. "Mom," it began. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. It also probably means that Stephanie has shown you exactly who she really is. I am so sorry for that, Mom. So sorry for the pain she has caused you. But I can't say I'm surprised. I've known for a long time the kind of person I married, and I've been preparing for this day, hoping it would never come." My eyes blurred with tears as I kept reading. "You gave us $40,000 for the down payment on our house. You always called it a family contribution. But I know it was a huge piece of your life savings, and I always considered it a loan. You never asked for a penny back. So for the past 5 years, I've been taking that money and investing it for you. I added to it whenever I could bits from my bonuses a little here and there. The money in the accounts you'll find here isn't just a repayment, Mom. It's what your love and sacrifice has grown into. It's your future, your independence." I had to set the letter down for a moment, my hand pressed to my mouth to stifle a sob. I looked at the documents beneath it. There were bank statements, investment portfolio summaries, account numbers, and deeds. My eyes scanned the balance sheets, but the numbers seemed to swim before me. I picked up the letter again, my hands shaking. "I also know Stephanie has been telling people you contribute nothing to the household," he wrote. "What she conveniently leaves out is that the mortgage has always been paid automatically from my salary account. Every dollar you gave us for household expenses over the past 2 years didn't go to groceries or utility bills. I took that money, every last cent, and put it directly into these investment accounts for you. It's all documented, Mom. Every email, every text message she ever sent complaining about you. I saved them. I thought you should know the truth. I thought you deserved to see what I was seeing." I reached for the thick folder he mentioned. Inside it was just as he said, printed emails between Stephanie and her sister complaining about the old bat, screenshots of text messages where she planned to turn my room into a home gym the moment I was gone. There were even copies of credit card statements showing lavish shopping sprees on the very day she had told David they were too tight on money to fix the leaky faucet. It was a cold, calculated campaign of manipulation and deceit, all laid out in black and white. The final paragraph of my son's letter shattered the last of my composure. "You deserve so much better, Mom. You deserve a life of peace and security where no one can ever make you feel like a burden again. Take this and build that life for yourself. And please, Mom, don't tell Stephanie about any of this until you are safely away from her. Trust me on this. All my love forever, David." I sat in that small, windowless room for nearly an hour, surrounded by the evidence of my son's incredible love and foresight. He had seen it all. He had known. And instead of causing a fight, instead of tearing his family apart while he was alive, he had quietly, methodically built a fortress to protect me after he was gone. When I finally emerged from the vault, Mrs. Peterson helped me transfer the documents into a large portfolio and explained exactly how to access the accounts. As I was walking to my car, my phone buzzed. It was Stephanie. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. I was wondering if you'd like to come by for lunch today. We could talk about what you found in the box." I looked at my own reflection in the car window, the reflection of a woman who was no longer homeless, no longer helpless. I smiled. "That's a lovely idea, Stephanie," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I'll be there at noon." It was time. Time for Stephanie to learn that you should never, ever underestimate a mother. And you should certainly never underestimate the enduring love of her son. I walked up to the front door of the house that had been my home until so recently, my pace deliberate, unhurried. The gift bag I carried swung lightly against my leg with each step. Looking at the beautiful colonial facade, I felt oddly detached, as if I were visiting a place I'd only seen in photographs, rather than the home where I'd lived for 2 years. My knock was answered almost immediately. Stephanie stood in the doorway wearing a flowing white dress that belonged at a garden party, not in the home of a woman who buried her husband mere weeks ago. Her smile was radiant, practiced the same one she wore in all her social media photos. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you came." Her voice dripped with false warmth as she ushered me inside. "I made your favorite chicken salad. Funny how quickly she remembered my preferences now that she thought I had something she wanted. The dining room was staged like a magazine spread. Her finest china gleamed on the polished mahogany table, fresh hydrangeas arranged in a crystal vase cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. A performance designed to project reconciliation and warmth. She poured iced tea into tall glasses, chattering about the weather, a neighbor's new puppy, the church fundraiser she was organizing, everything except what we both knew was the real reason for this reunion. I let her talk, sipping my tea and observing her with the same calm detachment I might study a subject for a painting. Her hands trembled slightly as she served the chicken salad. Tiny cracks in her polished veneer. She'd changed the decor already, I noticed. The family photos that had included me were gone, replaced by artistic black and white portraits of her and David. My presence was being systematically erased. So she finally said, her voice taking on a more serious tone as she settled into her chair. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about yesterday about that safety deposit box." I merely nodded, waiting. The portfolio from the bank sat heavy in my purse beside my chair, its contents a shield I could now deploy at will. "And I know we've had our differences," she continued, leaning forward conspirationally. "But David would want us to support each other. Family has to stick together, especially during a difficult time like this." Family. The word sounded foreign coming from the woman who had made me homeless the day after her husband's funeral. I studied the delicate pattern on the china plate before me, marveling at how easily such beautiful things could break. "I couldn't agree more," I replied evenly. Her eyes lit up. She thought she had me. "Oh, I'm so relieved to hear you say that. I was so worried you might be angry about having to find your own place so quickly. But you understand, don't you? I just needed my space to grieve." "Of course," I said, taking a small bite of the chicken salad. It was actually quite good. "Grief affects everyone differently." "Exactly," she said, seizing the opening like a predator spotting weakness. "So about what David left for you, I was thinking we could pool our resources, combine whatever was in that box with the life insurance payout. Maybe invest it all together. I have some absolutely wonderful financial advisors who could help us." I set my fork down gently. "That's a very generous thought, Stephanie. But I have a question for you." She blinked, momentarily thrown by my deviation from her script. "Yes. What makes you so certain there was anything of value in that box at all?" She was clearly taken aback by the question. "Well, David was always so private about his finances. He must have had a reason for keeping something separate like that." "Private," I mused, taking another slow sip of tea. "That's one word for it." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, you know men always keeping little secrets from us wives." I looked her directly in the eye. "Actually, Stephanie, I think David told you exactly as much as he thought you deserved to know." A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. For the first time, her composure seemed to waver. "What did you find in the box, Eleanor?" The sugary sweetness in her voice had evaporated. The moment of truth was here, but I decided to let it wait just a little longer. I reached for the gift bag I'd brought with me. "I brought you a little something," I said, pulling out a small, beautifully wrapped package. "Just a small thank you for lunch." She unwrapped it, a flicker of curiosity on her face. It was a framed photograph of David taken on his college graduation day. He looked so young, so happy, so full of promise. For a second, a genuine softness touched her features. "Oh, Eleanor," she said quietly, "this is lovely. I thought you should have it," I said. "After all, you were such a devoted wife." The slight emphasis I put on the word devoted did not go unnoticed. She looked up at me sharply, her eyes narrowed. "What is that supposed to mean?" "Nothing at all," I replied serenely. "I'm just appreciating what a good wife you were to my son." She set the photo down, her demeanor shifting entirely. The performance was over. "You're being cryptic, Eleanor. Just tell me what was in the box." I smiled. "Documents," I said simply. "Mostly documents. Very interesting reading material." "What kind of documents?" She pressed, the color rising in her cheeks. "Oh, you know, financial records, investment statements, and some personal correspondence." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Quite a lot of printed emails and text messages, actually. If she had been pale before, she was now as white as the dress she was wearing. "Text messages," she whispered. "My son, my wonderfully thorough son. He had left me everything I needed." I pulled out my phone where I had taken pictures of some of the more illuminating screenshots. "He was quite a meticulous record keeper, especially these last few months," I said conversationally. "Would you like to see one?" "This is a text you sent to your sister. Let's see. About 6 months ago. I turned the screen toward her. Her own words stared back at her. God, I can't wait until that old bat finally moves out. Then we can turn her room into the home gym I've been wanting. She lunged for my phone, but I calmly pulled it back. There are dozens more, I said, my voice still gentle. This one is particularly enlightening. It's you and your brother Marcus discussing how you'd been convincing David that I needed to contribute more to household expenses when you both knew the mortgage was already being paid in full from his salary. Stop, she breathed, her voice barely audible. And then there's this rather amusing email thread with your friend laughing about how gullible I was. How easy it was to make me feel like a burden when you were already planning to kick me out the moment David was gone. I set my phone down on the table beside my plate. That was very forward-thinking of you, by the way, planning my eviction while my son was still alive. Her composure finally shattered into a million pieces. He had no right, she hissed. He had no right to save my private messages. Actually, I corrected her gently. He had every right. It was his home and you were discussing his mother. But the real question, Stephanie, isn't about his rights. It's about what we are going to do with this information now. Her eyes, stripped of all their pretense, were filled with a raw, calculating fear. What do you want? She demanded. Want, I asked, considering the question. I don't want a single thing from you, Stephanie. I never did. Then why are you doing this? She cried, her voice rising. What is the point of humiliating me? I looked at her, this woman who had caused me so much pain, and I felt not anger, but a profound sadness. You know you're right. There is no point in me humiliating you. You've done a perfectly fine job of that all by yourself. You threw me out of my home. You called me worthless. You laughed at my grief. I stood up from the table and finished my thought. But the truly beautiful part, he documented it all. Not to hurt you, Stephanie. He did it to protect me because he knew. He knew that the moment he was gone, you would finally show your true colors. She stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to find a way out of the corner she had painted herself into. You can't prove any of this, she stammered. It wouldn't hold up in court. I almost laughed. The sound surprised me. Court, oh my dear, we are not going to court. She blinked, confused. Why would I need to? You see, you've already given me everything I could ever want. I reached into my large purse and pulled out the portfolio from David's safety deposit box, placing it on the table between the pristine china plates. David left me more than just screenshots, Stephanie. He left me 5 years of evidence. She stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. Bank statements. I continued, my voice low and steady, showing the mortgage payments being automatically deducted from David's salary every month for the entire 2 years I lived here. Email chains between you and your brother discussing how to best handle the Eleanor situation after he was gone. Credit card statements detailing thousands of dollars in luxury purchases you made on the very same days you were telling David that money was tight. Her breathing became shallow, ragged. David saved all of that. Oh yes, he was very thorough. He even saved the emails you sent to your friends calling him a pushover and joking about how easy it was to manipulate him into thinking I was a financial burden. That one hit its mark. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. But do you want to know what I found most interesting? I asked, opening the folder to a specific tab. It's this email thread right here, the one where you and Marcus brainstormed your long-term plan to have me declared legally incompetent so you could gain control of my pension and Social Security. Her face went slack with shock. We never actually... No, I agreed. You never followed through with it. And do you know why? Because my son figured out what you were planning and he took steps to protect me. Her eyes widened. What steps? You don't have anything worth protecting. I allowed myself a small, pleasant smile. Don't I? Well, according to these investment statements right here, it seems I have quite a bit worth protecting. Money that David had been carefully, lovingly growing for me for the past 5 years. The silence in the room was absolute. I could practically see the gears turning in her head, the frantic calculations. How much she finally whispered the word, escaping her lips like a puff of smoke. Excuse me, how much money? She demanded. I closed the folder and stood up, ready to leave. That, Stephanie, is really none of your business. I'm his wife, she shrieked, shooting to her feet. I have a right to know. You had a right to what your husband left you in his will, I said calmly. And if I recall, it was quite a generous settlement. The house, the cars, the insurance, the retirement funds. I'd say you made out very well. You manipulative old witch, she spat, her face contorted with rage. You're trying to steal what is rightfully mine. Steal? I raised an eyebrow. How exactly everything I have was given to me freely and legally by my son? He was my husband. Yes, he was, I said, my voice softening with a wave of love for my boy. And apparently he knew exactly what kind of wife you were, just as he knew what kind of mother I was. The words echoed in the beautiful dining room, stripped of all their pretense and civility. You're just his mother. For a moment, the casual cruelty of it stung. But then, as I stood there looking at the woman my son had married, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. The pain was replaced by a quiet strength. You know what, Stephanie? I said, my voice clear and steady. You are absolutely right. I am just his mother, the woman who gave birth to him, the woman who raised him to be a kind, decent, and honorable man, the woman who loved him unconditionally every single day of his life, the woman who gave him the down payment for this very house you now stand in, the one you threw me out of like a piece of trash. I slung my purse over my shoulder, the weight of the portfolio inside a comforting presence. And apparently I concluded being just his mother was more than enough for David. It was enough for him to make absolutely certain that I would never again have to depend on the charity or goodwill of anyone else for the rest of my life. I turned and walked toward the front door. Wait, she cried out behind me, her voice laced with a new, desperate panic. Eleanor, wait. We can work this out. Please, just let's talk about this rationally. I paused in the doorway and looked back at her. What exactly is there to work out? Everything she said, speaking quickly. The money, our relationship. Look, I know I made mistakes. I was grieving. I was stressed about finances. I'm sure you were worried about finances, I interrupted quietly. But not for the reasons you claim. I pulled one last document from the folder, one I had been saving. This is a credit card statement, Stephanie, from the month before David died. He documented your spending habits too. $15,000 in 1 month. Spa treatments, designer handbags, a weekend trip to New York with your sister, all while you were telling your husband you were worried about paying for groceries. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. The fight completely drained out of her. She collapsed back into her chair, a broken doll in a designer dress. You don't understand, she whimpered. The pressure. Everyone expected me to be the perfect wife, to have the perfect life. I looked at her, sitting amidst the trappings of her perfect life, and I felt nothing but pity. No, Stephanie, I said softly. I don't think I do understand, because while you were busy maintaining appearances, I was busy actually taking care of my son. I loved him, she whispered, tears now streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. You loved what he could provide for you, I corrected her gently. There is a difference. I can't lose everything, she sobbed. I can't go back to being nobody. You're not nobody, Stephanie. You are David's widow. You have this $500,000 house free and clear. You have a $200,000 life insurance policy. You have his retirement accounts. You are financially secure for the rest of your life if you manage it wisely. But it's not enough for the life I had planned, she cried. Then perhaps, I said, turning to leave for the final time, you simply planned the wrong life. I left her there, weeping in her perfectly set dining room, surrounded by the beautiful things she valued so much more than people. I walked out of that house and into the bright afternoon sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in years. They say the best revenge is living well, but I don't think this was about revenge. It was about justice. It was about the truth finally coming into the light. And it was about a son's love, a love so powerful and so thoughtful that it reached across the veil to take care of his mother one last time. My David had kept his word. Even from beyond the grave he had protected me, and that more than any amount of money was the greatest gift he could have ever given me. As I drove away, I didn't look back at the house. Instead, I looked forward toward the vast horizon of possibilities that had suddenly opened before me. For the first time since I'd gotten that terrible phone call at 3:17 in the morning, I felt something like peace. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of activity. I checked out of the Hampton Inn and moved into a comfortable extended-stay hotel with a kitchenette. I visited the bank again this time, meeting with a financial advisor who helped me understand the full extent of what David had done. Over the past 5 years, my son had taken my original $40,000 contribution and through a series of smart investments grown it to just over $175,000. He had added to it from his own salary and bonuses, bringing the total to nearly $250,000. And most remarkably, every dollar I had given for household expenses during the 2 years I lived with them, approximately $19,200 had been invested in a separate high-yield account that now stood at just under $22,000. In total, I now had access to investments and cash holdings worth approximately $272,000. Not a fortune by any means, but more than enough to secure my independence. Enough to buy a small condo outright or to put a substantial down payment on a modest house and still have plenty left over for living expenses. For a woman who had been homeless just days ago, it was a lifeline thrown from beyond the grave. A final loving gift from a son who had seen through his wife's facade and taken steps to protect his mother. I spent the afternoon researching real estate listings, focusing on small condos and townhouses within a 30-mile radius. I wanted to stay close enough to visit David's grave regularly, but far enough away that I wouldn't risk running into Stephanie at the grocery store or post office. My phone rang 4 times that day, Stephanie each time. I let each call go to voicemail. Her messages evolved from pleading to angry to threatening to desperate. In her final message, she was openly sobbing, begging me to call her back, claiming that she had things of David's that she wanted me to have. I deleted them all without response. That chapter of my life was closed. Instead, I called my sister in Phoenix. We hadn't been particularly close since she moved west 20 years ago, but David's death and my subsequent eviction had drawn us back together. When I told her about the safety deposit box and its contents, she laughed through her tears. "That boy always did love you something fierce," she said, her voice warm with memories. "Remember when he was 7 and he saved up his allowance for 3 months to buy you that hideous ceramic bird for Mother's Day? I did remember. That ugly little bird had traveled with me from house to house, always finding a place of honor on whatever mantle I had at the time. It was one of the few treasures I'd managed to pack before Stephanie threw me out. Now it sat on the dresser of my hotel room, its chipped beak and garish colors a reminder of a love that had sustained me through the darkest times." By the end of the week, I had scheduled viewings of 3 promising properties, a small 2-bedroom condo in a retirement community, a charming townhouse near the lake, and a cozy cottage on the outskirts of town. Each had its merits, but I found myself drawn to the cottage. It needed work. Fresh paint, new flooring, updated appliances, but it had good bones and a small sunroom that would make a perfect art studio. I could see myself there starting over. I made an offer the same day, slightly below asking price, but with a quick closing timeline. My real estate agent assured me that my strong financial position, the ability to pay cash without financing contingencies, made me an attractive buyer despite the lower offer. "We should hear back within 48 hours, she said. That night, I treated myself to dinner at a nice restaurant. Nothing fancy, just a place with tablecloths and candles. I ordered a glass of wine, something I rarely did, and raised it in a silent toast to David. "Thank you, my sweet boy," I thought. "I will make the most of this second chance." As I was signing the check, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Marcus, Stephanie's brother. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Stephanie is not well. She hasn't eaten in days and is talking about selling the house. Please call me." I stared at the message for a long moment, then turned off my phone without responding. Whatever crisis Stephanie was experiencing was no longer my concern. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. The following morning, my real estate agent called with good news. My offer on the cottage had been accepted with only minor modifications to the closing timeline. I could take possession in 3 weeks. I signed the paperwork that afternoon, my hand steady as I wrote my name again and again, claiming this new beginning. As I was leaving the real estate office, a familiar car pulled into the parking lot, Marcus's sleek black Lexus. He must have been following me or tracking my movements somehow. I straightened my shoulders and prepared for confrontation. "Eleanor, please," he began as he approached, his tone conciliatory. "We need to talk." "I believe we said everything that needed saying at the reading of the will," I replied, keeping my voice level. "Stephanie is falling apart," he continued, ignoring my dismissal. "She's talking about contesting the will, claiming David wasn't of sound mind. She's convinced herself that you manipulated him somehow." I almost smiled at the irony. "And what do you think, Marcus?" He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture of genuine frustration. "I think my sister made some terrible mistakes. I think she treated you shamefully. And I think this legal battle she wants to pursue will cost her more than just money." A week ago, his admission would have felt like vindication. Now it just felt sad. "What do you want from me?" "Talk to her. Help her see reason. She respects you more than you know." This time I did laugh, a short, disbelieving sound. "She has a strange way of showing respect, Marcus. Throwing someone out of their home with no warning doesn't exactly scream admiration." I know. His voice was weary, defeated. But she's my sister and she's spiraling. Whatever David left you, it's clearly legal and binding. The safety deposit box was in his name alone, the contents his to bequeath. Fighting it will only drain her resources and prolong her grief. I studied him, trying to discern his true motives. Was this genuine concern for his sister, or was he worried about the legal fees he'd have to charge her for a futile court battle? Tell Stephanie that I have no interest in further communication, I said finally. The money David left me is mine legally and morally. She has the house, the life insurance, the retirement accounts, far more than most widows are left with. If she chooses to waste her inheritance on a frivolous lawsuit, that's her decision. He nodded, accepting defeat. I'll tell her. But Eleanor, she's not evil. She's just broken in some fundamental way. I think deep down she always knew David loved you more than he loved her. And that knowledge ate at her year after year. His words gave me pause. Not because they excused Stephanie's behavior, but because they illuminated it. I remembered the woman my son had first brought home, ambitious, yes, but also charming and seemingly affectionate. Had she changed over time, or had she simply become more fully herself? Tell her I wish her peace, I said finally, and suggest that she might benefit from speaking with a professional about her grief. We all process loss differently. Marcus looked surprised, then grateful. Thank you. I'll tell her. As he walked back to his car, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had stood my ground without becoming hardened by bitterness. I had found compassion without surrendering my dignity. David would have been proud. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. I arranged for utilities to be connected at my new cottage, purchased essential furniture, and began the process of rebuilding a household from scratch. Each decision, from his color of bath towels to the style of coffee maker, felt significant, a choice made for myself alone without having to consider anyone else's preferences. It was a strange kind of freedom, this starting over. Daunting at times, certainly, but also exhilarating. I found myself smiling more, sleeping better, even humming as I shopped for kitchen gadgets and bed linens. The acute grief over David's death hadn't diminished. I doubted it ever would, but it was now companioned by a sense of purpose, a reason to get up each morning and face the day. 2 days before my scheduled closing date, I received an unexpected package delivered to my hotel. The return address was the house I had shared with David and Stephanie. My first instinct was to refuse it, to send it back unopened, but curiosity won out. Inside was a small wooden box I recognized immediately, David's childhood treasure box where he had kept Special Rocks baseball cards and his first watch. Nestled inside was the ceramic bird I had thought safely packed among my belongings, along with a note in Stephanie's handwriting. I found this while cleaning out David's closet. I remembered how much it meant to him. I thought you should have it back. S. I turned the ceramic bird over in my hands, puzzled by this gesture. Was it an olive branch? A final act of contrition, or had she simply found one more opportunity to remind me of my loss? Then I noticed something odd. The bird felt lighter than I remembered, and there was a small seam around its base that I'd never seen before. Carefully, I twisted the bottom, and to my surprise, it came loose, revealing a hollow interior. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a note in David's handwriting dated just 1 month before his death. Mom, if you're reading this, you've found my childhood hiding spot. I wanted you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me and Stephanie. The money in the safety deposit box is just a small token of that appreciation. Use it well, and know that my greatest wish is for you to reclaim the dreams you set aside for me. Remember the art studio you always wanted, the pottery wheel that gathered dust in the garage after Dad died? It's time for you to pick up those brushes again. Life is too short for unfulfilled dreams. All my love, David. Tears blurred my vision as I carefully refolded the note and returned it to its hiding place. Even in death, my son was finding new ways to care for me, new ways to remind me of who I had been before grief and compromise had reshaped my identity. The next morning, I made one additional purchase before heading to the closing, a pottery wheel and a complete set of glazes and tools. They would be delivered to my new home the day after I moved in. It was time, as David had said, to reclaim the dreams I had set aside. It was time to remember that I was not just David's mother or Robert's widow. I was Eleanor Fairfield, artist, teacher, survivor. The cottage with its sunroom studio and quiet garden would be more than just a place to live. It would be a testament to a son's enduring love and a mother's resilience. It would be proof that sometimes the end of one story is merely the beginning of another. As I signed the final papers making the cottage officially mine, I felt David's presence as surely as if he were standing beside me. "Well done, Mom," I could almost hear him say. "Now go make something beautiful." And I intended to do just that. The morning light filtered through the cottage windows, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floor I'd refinished myself. 6 months had passed since I'd first turned the key in this door, claiming this space as my sanctuary. The small 2-bedroom cottage on the edge of town had needed work peeling wallpaper, outdated fixtures, a kitchen straight from 1975, but beneath the cosmetic flaws lay good bones, and most importantly, potential. Rather like myself. I stood in the doorway of what had once been a forgotten sunroom and was now my studio, admiring the transformation. David's pottery wheel commanded the center of the space, surrounded by shelves of glazes, tools, and clay in various stages of completion. The muscles in my hands ached pleasantly from yesterday's work, 6 hours lost to the hypnotic rhythm of the wheel, the cool slip of clay between my fingers. I was relearning the feel of it, the way it responded to pressure and water, how it could transform from formless lump to graceful vessel under patient hands. Like me, it was finding new shape after being broken down. On the windowsill, my first completed pieces caught the morning light, simple bowls and mugs still clumsy with disuse. I hadn't touched clay in over 15 years, not since Robert died, and I'd packed away my artistic ambitions along with his clothes. Now, with each piece I created, I felt something long dormant awakening within me. Not just skill returning to my fingers, but purpose returning to my days. Today marked a milestone I'd been both anticipating and dreading. 6 months since David's death. Half a year since that terrible 3:17 a.m. phone call that had shattered my world. Half a year since Stephanie had thrown me out of what I'd thought was my home, sending me tumbling into an abyss I'd never expected to navigate at 67. I'd visit his grave today as I did every week, but first I needed to prepare for another significant event dinner with James. James Morrison, the attorney who had changed everything by simply doing his job delivering David's final gift to me. We'd run into each other 2 months ago at the local farmer's market where I'd begun selling small pottery pieces. He'd bought a coffee mug glazed in deep forest green, commenting on its comfortable grip. The following week, he'd returned for another, this one in cobalt blue. By the 3rd week, when he'd selected a mug in amber gold, he'd worked up the courage to invite me to dinner. I'd declined instinctively. The second invitation 2 weeks later had left me hesitating before giving the same answer. But yesterday, when he'd stopped by my booth to admire a new collection of bud vases, the 3rd invitation had surprised us both with my acceptance. Not a date, I told myself firmly as I changed outfits 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that complemented my silver hair. Just dinner between friends. 2 people sharing a meal and conversation. Still, I found myself applying lipstick for the first time in years, adding a pair of small silver earrings that caught the light when I moved. But before evening arrived, I had a grave to visit and memories to honor. The cemetery was peaceful in the late morning dappled sunlight filtering through ancient oak trees. David's plot was in a newer section, the grass still establishing itself around the headstone. I knelt to replace last week's wilted flowers with fresh sunflowers, his favorite, and brushed a few fallen leaves from the cold granite. 6 months today, sweetheart, I whispered, arranging the flowers in the built-in vase. The cottage is really coming along now. You'd hardly recognize it from when I bought it. I've got the studio set up just the way I always talked about, and I've actually been selling pieces at the farmer's market. Can you believe it? Your old mom a working artist again. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves overhead, and I could almost imagine it was David's response, his way of letting me know he was listening. I continued my one-sided conversation, telling him about the pottery classes I'd signed up for at the community center, the neighbors I'd met, the small dinner party I was planning with my sister when she visited next month. I made something for you, I said, pulling a small glazed medallion from my pocket. It was a simple piece, just a circular disc with his initials pressed into the clay, fired with a deep blue glaze that reminded me of his eyes. I nestled it among the sunflowers, a more permanent offering than the weekly blooms. As I stood to leave, a familiar silver BMW pulled slowly through the cemetery gates. Stephanie. I hadn't seen her since our confrontation 6 months ago, though I'd heard through the small-town grapevine that she had listed the house for sale and was staying with her sister while it languished on the market. For a moment, I considered hurrying to my car to avoid an encounter. Then I straightened my shoulders and remained where I was. I had nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of. This was my son, too, and I would not be chased from his graveside. The BMW parked a respectful distance away, and Stephanie emerged looking markedly different from the polished, perfect woman who had thrown me out of her home. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face bare of makeup, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a plain blouse. She carried a small bouquet of white roses and didn't notice me at first, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. When she finally looked up and saw me standing by David's grave, she froze mid-step. For a long moment, we regarded each other across the manicured grass, two women connected by love for the same man, divided by everything else. I nodded a greeting neither warm nor hostile, simply acknowledging her presence. She hesitated, then continued forward until she stood on the opposite side of the headstone. We existed in a bubble of awkward silence, the air between us heavy with unspoken accusations and regrets. "I should go," I said, finally gathering my purse. "You'll want some time alone with him." Her eyes darted to the blue medallion nestled among my sunflowers, then to the roses in her own hands. "Did you make that?" Her voice was hoarse, as if she didn't use it much these days. I nodded. "I've been working with clay again. David always encouraged my art." She swallowed hard, looking down at the granite marker. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said suddenly, "twice a week since our last conversation. She's helped me understand some things about myself, about why I behaved the way I did." I waited, unsure where this was leading. "I have something for you," she continued, reaching into her bag with her free hand. "I found it when I was packing up David's things. It was in the back of his closet in a box labeled Mom's Birthday." My heart constricted at the thought of a gift my son had chosen, but never had the chance to give. With slightly trembling fingers, I unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a small, exquisite potter's tool set in a handcrafted leather case. Professional quality, the kind I had always admired, but never splurged on for myself. "His birthday card was with it," Stephanie said, handing me an envelope. "I didn't read it, but I thought you should have it." The card bore my name in David's familiar handwriting. Inside was a simple message. "Mom, to help you rediscover what brings you joy. No more excuses about rusty skills or expensive tools. It's time to create again. Love always, David." Tears blurred my vision as I ran my fingers over the fine tools, each one designed for specific textures and details in clay work. He must have researched carefully, consulted with professional potters to select such a perfect gift. Even in his final months unknown to me, he had been planning my revival. "I also found his journal," Stephanie said quietly. "After our confrontation, his secretary gave it to me after the funeral. He kept it in his desk at work." I looked up, my curiosity piqued despite myself. "He wrote about you, about how proud he was of you for starting over after his father died. How he wished I could appreciate your strength the way he did." Her voice cracked on the last words. The admission hung in the air between us, a fragile thread of potential connection. I could snap it with a cold word, or I could acknowledge the olive branch she seemed to be extending. The old Eleanor, the woman desperate for approval, afraid of confrontation, might have rushed to reassure her. The new Eleanor considered her options carefully. "Grief changes us," I said finally. "Sometimes it brings out our worst. Sometimes it forces us to confront hard truths." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks now. "I've lost everything," she whispered. "The house won't sell in this market. Marcus says I'll be lucky to break even after the new roof and repairs. The insurance money's half gone already. I'm working at the florist shop on Main Street now, learning to make arrangements." She gave a small, bitter laugh at the irony. "Me working retail. My friends have all disappeared. Turns out they were only interested in Stephanie with the perfect house and unlimited credit cards." A month ago, her distress would have satisfied some dark corner of my heart that still craved justice. Now it just made me tired. I had moved beyond the need for her suffering to validate my own. "You're young, Stephanie," I said, my voice gentler than I'd intended. "You can rebuild, start over, find out who you are without the designer clothes and the perfect house." She looked at me, then really looked at me, perhaps for the first time. "You seem different." "I am different. Grief transforms us. So does betrayal. So does finding yourself at 67 with nothing but 4 suitcases and a prayer." I touched the top of David's headstone, a silent goodbye. "But I've discovered something interesting about starting over. The second act can sometimes be better than the first, especially when you know what mistakes not to repeat." I turned to go, but her voice stopped me. "I'd like to give you the journal," she said. "It should be yours. He knew about his heart condition. The doctors had warned him. There's so much in there about you, about his plans to protect you." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "And I'm sorry, Eleanor, for everything. I know it doesn't change anything. I know you probably hate me, and you should. But I needed to say it." I looked back at her tear-streaked face, at the genuine remorse etched in her features. "I don't hate you, Stephanie. I don't have the energy for hate anymore. What you did was cruel and unnecessary, but in a strange way it freed me. For years I made myself smaller to fit into other people's lives. First Robert's, then David's, then yours. Now I'm living for myself, and I'm finding I quite like my own company." I gestured toward the blue medallion among the sunflowers. "You're welcome to keep that when you change the flowers. It won't fade or wilt." Without waiting for her response, I walked away, my steps lighter than they had been in months. I had not forgiven her some betrayals cut too deep for easy absolution, but I had released the weight of resentment. That was enough for now. That evening, James picked me up promptly at 7, driving a well-maintained older Volvo that suited his professorial image. He complimented my cottage, noticed the pottery wheel visible through the studio door, admired the garden I'd planted along the front walk. His observations were specific and genuine, not the automatic flattery of a man trying to impress, but the appreciative notes of someone who truly saw what was before him. Dinner was at a small Italian restaurant by the lake, white tablecloths and candles creating an atmosphere that walked the line between special and intimidating. I was grateful for the new confidence that had grown alongside my pottery skills. The old Eleanor might have felt out of place, might have hunched her shoulders and spoken too softly. The new Eleanor sat straight, met the waiter's eye, and ordered exactly what she wanted. When James asked about my history with pottery, the words flowed more easily than I expected. I told him about my art school dreams set aside for marriage and motherhood, the small pottery business I'd built while David was in school working from a converted garage studio, how I'd packed it all away after Robert died, convinced that serious artistic pursuits were a luxury I could no longer afford. "And now," he asked, genuine curiosity warming his voice, "what does pottery mean to you now?" I considered the question, twirling the stem of my wineglass between my fingers. "Now it feels like reclaiming a part of myself I thought was gone forever. Like having a conversation with a younger version of me who never stopped believing that making beautiful things matters. The clay remembers what my hands forgot, and together we're creating something new." He smiled, the candlelight reflecting in his glasses. "That's poetry, Eleanor. You're a maker in more ways than one." The evening stretched pleasantly into night, our conversation ranging widely across books we'd loved, places we'd visited, lessons we'd learned from long marriages, and the pain of losing them. I found myself speaking of David with a warmth that surprised me, not focusing on the tragedy of his death, but celebrating the gift of his life and the extraordinary legacy of love he'd left behind. When he drove me home, James walked me to my door, but didn't press for more than a warm handshake and the promise of another dinner soon. As I watched his taillights disappear down the quiet street, I realized I was smiling. Not the practiced social smile I'd perfected in Stephanie's house, nor the brave face I'd worn through David's funeral. A real smile, spontaneous and unguarded. I was happy, not completely, not without shadows, but genuinely pleased with this moment in my life. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and padded to the studio in stockinged feet. The piece I'd been working on earlier sat waiting on the wheel, a tall vase with a graceful neck, more ambitious than anything I'd attempted since restarting. I switched on the lamp and ran my fingers lightly over the semi-dry clay, checking for inconsistencies in thickness, planning the decorative elements I would add tomorrow. My phone buzzed with a text. "Thank you for a lovely evening. Your insights about grief as a transformative process rather than merely a burden to endure will stay with me. Until next time. James." I typed a simple reply acknowledging his message and expressing my own enjoyment of the evening. Then I turned my attention to David's journal, which Stephanie had delivered to me that afternoon after our cemetery encounter. It was a simple leather-bound book, its pages filled with David's neat handwriting. The entries began approximately 3 years into his marriage to Stephanie, around the time I had first noticed tensions between them. "Mom came for dinner tonight," read an early entry. S was polite on the surface, but made those little cutting remarks she thinks I don't notice. I see how Mom shrinks a little each time, trying to take up less space, be less trouble. It breaks my heart. She deserves better than this after all she's done for me. I paused, struck by his perception. I had thought I'd hidden my discomfort so well maintained a cheerful facade that fooled everyone. But David had seen through. It had recognized my efforts to make myself smaller, less noticeable. The entries continued documenting the gradual deterioration of his marriage, alongside his growing concern for my future security. He detailed his investment strategy for my money, his discovery of Stephanie's excessive spending, his growing awareness of her plans to remove me from their home once I was no longer useful as free childcare for the children they had planned but never conceived. Made another deposit to Mom's investment account today. Read an entry from about 2 years before his death. S thinks I'm putting money into our vacation fund. The irony isn't lost on me. She's planning trips to Europe while complaining about the cost of Mom's medications. Sometimes I wonder what happened to the woman I married. Was she always this calculating and I just didn't see it? Or has something changed? The final entries, written in the weeks before his death, revealed what I had suspected he had known about his heart condition. The doctors had warned him after some inconclusive tests suggested further evaluation, but he had already begun preparing for the worst. Saw Dr. Mitchell today. Read the entry dated just 1 week before his death. The tests aren't conclusive, but he's concerned about my heart. Family history isn't great. Dad was only 50 when his gave out. I'm scheduled for more tests next week, but I've made sure everything is in order just in case. The safety deposit box is secure, the will updated. Mom will be taken care of if anything happens. That's what matters most. The last entry, dated the very day before he died, contained just 2 sentences. Called the pottery supply store about Mom's birthday gift. I hope it encourages her to create again. She's put her own dreams aside for too long. I closed the journal, gently overwhelmed by this intimate glimpse into my son's final thoughts. He had known he might be running out of time. He had felt the warning signs and taken steps to protect me, prioritizing my security even as he faced his own mortality. That night I dreamed of David as a child, clay-covered hands proudly presenting me with a misshapen ashtray, though neither his father nor I smoked. In my dream, I told him how beautiful it was, how talented he was. Then the dream shifted, and adult David stood before me, admiring a vase I'd created, telling me how beautiful it was, how talented I was. The circle completed itself, the student becoming the teacher, the child nurturing the parent. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a sense of peace in my heart. Over the next few months, my pottery skills continued to improve. What had begun as therapy became a modest source of income, supplementing my pension and the investment funds David had left me. My pieces at the farmer's market sold well, and I'd even received commissions for custom work. James and I settled into a comfortable routine of weekly dinners, occasional concerts at the community college where he still had connections, and long conversations on my front porch as summer transitioned to early fall. When my sister visited from Phoenix, she marveled at the transformation, not just in the cottage, which now reflected my artistic sensibilities in every room, but in me. "You look 10 years younger," she said one evening as we shared a bottle of wine on the porch. "And not just physically. There's a lightness to you I haven't seen since before Robert died." "I feel lighter," I admitted. "Sometimes I feel guilty about that, like I shouldn't be building this new life while David is gone. But then I remember that this is exactly what he wanted for me." "Of course it is," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "That boy always did love you something fierce. Remember when he was 7 and he saved up his allowance for 3 months to buy you that hideous ceramic bird for Mother's Day?" I laughed, the memory vivid and precious. That ugly little bird traveled with me from house to house, always finding a place of honor on whatever mantle I had at the time. It was one of the few treasures I'd managed to pack before Stephanie threw me out. Now it sat on the mantel above my small fireplace, its chipped beak and garish colors a reminder of a love that had sustained me through the darkest times. As autumn deepened, James and I grew closer. Our relationship evolved slowly, neither of us in a rush to define what was developing between us. We had both loved deeply once before. We understood the value of patience. When he first kissed me, standing beside my car after a chamber music concert, it felt both surprising and inevitable, a natural progression rather than a dramatic new chapter. I introduced him to my pottery, showing him the techniques I'd mastered, the glazes I'd formulated myself. He showed me his collection of first edition poetry volumes, reading aloud to me on rainy afternoons. We discovered a shared love of hiking, exploring the wooded trails around the lake, stopping to sketch interesting rock formations or unusual trees. One anniversary evening, exactly 1 year after David's death, I sat alone in my studio working on a special piece, a large decorative platter with a spiral design representing life's journey, its continuations and transformations. I was glazing it in blues and greens colors of growth and healing. When finished, I would take it to David's grave as an offering of gratitude. As I worked applying the glaze with meticulous care, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the devastating loss of my son to homelessness and betrayal, from the revelation of David's secret preparations to the rebuilding of my life on my own terms, it had been a path of fire and resurrection. I had not only survived, I had flourished. The cottage now truly felt like home, filled with objects I had chosen and arranged to please myself alone. The garden I had planted was settling in for winter, the last roses nodding sleepily in the evening breeze. In the distance, I could see the lights of town beginning to twinkle on a community that now included me as Eleanor the Potter, rather than just David's mother or the widow Fairfield. I had received a small grant from the local arts council to teach pottery to seniors at the community center. My pieces were now carried by 2 galleries in neighboring towns. I was planning a solo exhibition for the spring second acts. I would call it, featuring works that explored themes of rebirth and reinvention. And James had become a steadfast presence in my life, neither replacing David nor Robert, but creating his own unique space in my heart. We had begun discussing the possibility of traveling together, perhaps to the pottery villages of Japan or the ceramic studios of Italy. Not rushing, just exploring possibilities, savoring the luxury of future plans. The platter took shape beneath my hands, the spiral pattern emerging with each careful application of glaze. It would need firing tomorrow, but already I could envision the finished piece, a testament to continuity amid change, to the enduring nature of love across time and space. Outside my studio window, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, delicate white stars against the darkening sky. I watched them dance in the porch light, accumulating on the garden beds I'd so carefully tended through summer and fall. I wasn't afraid of winter anymore. I knew now that spring always followed, bringing new growth, new beauty, new possibilities. As darkness settled around my little cottage, I made a silent promise to my son I would live fully and authentically in this second act he had made possible. I would create beauty, cultivate joy, embrace new connections, and face each day with the quiet strength he had always admired in me. I would make him proud. It makes you think, doesn't it, about the legacies we leave behind? It's not always about the things we accumulate, but about the love we give and the lives we touch. My David taught me that. His true gift wasn't the money or the security, though I was grateful for both. His legacy was showing me that it's never too late to begin again, to reclaim forgotten dreams, to create something beautiful from the broken pieces of a shattered life. And somewhere beyond the veil that separates us now, I felt certain he was smiling.